with something like this, does the inspiration to adapt this start with, the war, this particular war, or this book?
It starts with the book. So certainly I read it in high school as a wee nipper, and really was just so drawn to the themes of the novel. Uh, the bigger theme of the betrayal of the youthful generation that really struck a chord for me, and especially because I'm a Scottish lassie, that sort of underdog fight, the everyman fighting against the upper brass in some respects. That was a huge appeal for me.
And for me, I mean, I'd obviously read it a few times, but I'm ex-British Army, and my genre is anything action, and I have a personal connection to it, like a lot of Brits do, and that my Grandad Reynolds, lied about his age during World War One. He was 17. He went straight to the Western Front, and about 3 weeks later, he was mustard gas, and he spent 2 years in hospital dealing with the repercussions of that. And then he died in '52, I think, from consequences of the mustard gas. So my family, I'm British Army. My dad was Royal Marine Commando during World War II, and Grandad Reynolds was, World War One. So we have a generational thing. We have a family military history as well. So as soon as I saw it, I was attracted to it, and Les and I went out and got the option. Basically, long story short.
What were those first conversations you two had about wanting to adapt this again? And what was your familiarity with the movie that, it was the Lewis Milestone film from
We
1930?
we said it's impossible. Let's move on to something else.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure why we ended up doing it.
No, I think we were really familiar with those other films, the 1979 television film as well. We watched all of those, and I think we were really drawn to the story because it was told from the side of the enemy. And especially being British, we grew up with all of our war films being about heroism and adventure, and this was anything but. And I think that seeing it from the other side and having some sense of humanity in the German telling of it was really unique and something we wanted to delve into. So, of course, we read the novel a lot of times and we did a lot of research. We read a lot of German trench war diaries, British trench war diaries, and just kind of really learned a lot about World War One. And aspects of World War One that were not taught about from our side. Primarily the armistice, the last 6 hours of the war, the reparations that Germany had to pay, all of those aspects that were fascinating to us.
So,
And,
okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then from a practical perspective, first thing we did when we got, after 3 or 4 weeks, we actually got the option. We got a couple of books, tore them up so that we had each scene, and we pinned it on the wall. There were like 60 scenes up there, and we sat on the couch and we were looking at it, and we just literally said, okay, so what the fuck do we do now?
Yeah.
Because adaptation does seem like thing that where you're, when do you allow the editing part of your brain to do it, where you're actually looking at scenes from the book and going what goes where, and then the imagination part where you bring yourself research you've done to that. How do those two meld together when you're writing something like this?
I think you have to respect the novel, especially because it's such a classic. So you really delve into the bigger themes first, and you say, okay, what's really important? What do we have to, hang a lantern on here? And so you start kind of big, and then you whittle down to the individual scenes and sequences that you feel really encapsulate that. And then for us, the novel's very much like excerpts of a diary, so it doesn't have that kind of dramatic through line. So in our research, that was something that we were really trying to find. And of course, we looked at this through the lens of having known that World War II has happened, whereas, Remarque wrote it not knowing this. So we felt like that was a really important aspect to bring in, that historical context of knowing that World War One caused World War II. So that then became our dramatic through line to give it some kind of ticking clock. especially that last 6 hours.
And I mean, obviously, although some people tend to forget what an adaptation is, you got 2.5 hours to put that whole novel into a cinematic story that people will sit and pay money for and watch. And so we picked two themes. It's all anti-war, of course. So we picked two themes in the novel, betrayal and futility of war, that Remarque had in there. And as Les was saying, we wanted to add something wasn't in the book, and that was historical context, because Remarque didn't have that. And the armistice and the end of World War I obviously led to the beginning of World War II. So we wanted that in there, and we added this is about 2006 is when we optioned it. From that day, July 20th, to the day it premiered at TIFF in September was just over 16 years it took us.
Not long.
Yeah,
a lot
just
of
like that, it was
money,
gone.
a lot of stress.
And then
Yeah.
Edward and Malta and Netflix came on about 3.5 years ago. But for the first 12 years, it was literally pushing a massive boulder up the hill.
What was the lowest point in that?
The 12 years before.
Yeah. Just, every year we had to renew the options, so we had to find the money, right? You're talking $10,000 to $15,000 a year, which we didn't have. That's a lot of money when, you're just kind of paying your bills.
And there's no end in sight.
And there's two ends. We didn't know that at the start, did we? So, and every year we had to convince the estate, or NYU Press that were in charge of the estate, that, hey, we're your guys, and every year that...
And then in the end, they got to the point where, okay, we've been with you so long, just whatever you want, we'll just sign off on it. So just tell us what you want.
Yeah.
So then it became sentimental, is what you're saying. Like on their
Yeah.
part, they were like,
Not so much now. They're selling a bunch of copies. They're happy.
They got a big payout.
how did you two get together as collaborators?
Yeah, we do seem like an unlikely couple. So Ian and I met. He was casting for a film. My background is I did an undergraduate and graduate in theatre. And theatre and film, but I've actually been a professional triathlete for the last 15 years. So I was acting at the time, and Ian was casting for a film, and we met that way. But we really connected over sport because he was a triathlete, and we just kind of really had that in common. And he said to me, "Okay, Leslie, if you truly want to be a successful actor, you have to write and produce your own films." And I thought, well, that's actually quite a good idea.
Little did you know.
Little did I know. No, actually, I did know. I was rubbish at acting, and
You were not rubbish. You're actually pretty good.
So what is the meeting point between athlete and being a writer?
There's a lot of similarities, to be honest. When I'm out training for hours as an endurance athlete, it's almost like a form of meditation. And the ideas that come to me through that sort of rhythmic motion, it sort of switches off that frontal cortex of your brain, and it allows you to access inner creativity and release ideas. And to be honest, when you're spending hours in the mountains, which I love to do, you go on these adventures in your head, you create these worlds. So I've always been creative in that aspect. And then interestingly, the creativity really helped my sport because I was not a conventional athlete. I was always told that I was not good enough, that my numbers were not good enough, my data was not good enough, but I was an athlete of heart. So it was my creativity that helped me kind of structure my training and find a different way to train to get to the top, because I've always said that getting to the top in anything is not a ladder, it's a cargo net. There's many different ways. And it's the same with film. Ian and I had to be so flexible and think outside the box about how to get this made and how to keep it going.
And totally relentless. And I mean, the amount of emails we sent out, follow-ups, meetings, phone calls. We were trying to work it out the other day, and it was, well over 2,000 over the years. It's just, and you just got to be utterly, utterly relentless. And just eventually, we just kept getting no. And about year 6, I would say, then we just started to get pissed off. And we were just like, big names, big agencies would say no, and we go, you're wrong, and we're going to prove you wrong. And that was 10 years ago, so it wasn't that quick.
And you have. So talk about the turning point and what that was like and how it happened. And Edward, is this when Edward Berger gets involved?
Yeah, so we were with another producer at the time, and it was through somebody, of course, as there always is in this
As the
business.
film
somebody through somebody through
industry
somebody.
works, it's always stepping stones
Yeah.
and
And
connect the dots.
and Ed reached out to us through email and said, Malta and I have read your script. We love it. Would you consider doing this in German? I have a great vision for this. I'm so passionate about the novel. It means a lot in our country. Would you have a conversation with us?
And people seem to be so scared of it because of the name and just the mythology behind it. So for 12 years we were just going no, 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 no. And then Ed comes along and he goes, I've got an idea how to do it, and this is how. And we were like, fuck, and it's like totally we're on board with whatever you want to do. And it was a great idea. He had great ideas.
Yeah. So were those earlier conversations with Edward like in the German perspective he was bringing to it? How did that dovetail with what you guys wanted to do?
I think for us it was that authenticity, really understanding what this novel means to them in their country. And furthermore, like that sense of shame that Germans have about war in general, which I didn't even know about. So I think almost in many ways the beauty of this film is the fact that it has that outside-in perspective that Ian and I brought, and then the inside-out perspective that Ed brought and the rest of the German crew brought. And that's why it's appealing probably to a wider audience.
And I think also, this came up the other day, about politics and everything else and the history of blah blah, and it's not really about politics. It's more for us about the everyman. Paul is the everyman, and it doesn't matter what side you're on. You're still in the same situation. It's extraordinary individuals placed in horrendous situations, doing extraordinary things, and just trying to live for the next 10 minutes. And that's what we saw as the underlying thing about Ed's vision.
Well, I do want to mention how, like one of my favorite things I've seen all year is that opening montage that takes you from one dead soldier's, shirt to who it goes to next. I just never seen anything like that.
That was Les's idea, just so everybody knows.
Can you talk about that?
Yay! So I actually came up with that while I was out running one day, so go figure. And I just actually watched Schindler's List and the girl with the red coat sequence, and that's what kind of spawned the idea. But of course, we wanted to open the film in the world of the trenches and really shock that audience. But then we wanted to go back to Paul at the home front because we really needed to get swept up in that patriotic fervour. And we were really trying to rack our brains, how could we do that, but still encapsulate the main theme of the film, that essentially the uniform is worth more than the man. That says everything about the film.
So she came up with that idea, and then we were in San Diego, so we sat down on the couch side by side with a computer, and we said, let's write that sequence. So we wrote it, and then when Edward came on board, added some amazing visuals, a bunch of new scenes, but along the same thing, and it just came out really well.
When you come up with a sequence like that, does that give you at least a few more years of persistence and trying to get this made?
It totally does. I remember thinking, and this doesn't happen often as a writer or a creative person because you often doubt yourself, but that was one of those ones where I'm like, this is an Oscar-worthy opening. So maybe it will be.
I call them tequila moments. It's like, that's brilliant with a tequila.
So Edward gets involved, and then it's going to get made, and you're thinking like, finally.
Oh yeah, it just felt right, I guess, is the only word. And we'd been through so many paths with so many different producers and directors, where you kind of will yourself on, oh my gosh, this is it. Oh yeah, this could be great. But then of course a producer goes to jail or something like that.
He really did go to jail because he swindled. I think it was Belgium out of $100 million. Film credit money.
Anyway, let's not talk about that.
I haven't heard a word from him in 5 years. I've been Googling like every other week. It's like, where's he gone?
So yeah, when Ed came along, and Malta as well, such a prolific producer, that teaming and them wanting to do it in German, right? It just felt so right in terms of the time, the landscape of film, what companies like Netflix were looking for, and we presented it at the Berlin Film Market, and it was literally like a kind of bidding war for the film. And it was,
I mean, a huge part of film's dirty little secret. A huge part of film is luck, and everything lining up. And right at this point, Netflix switched to local content, which would never be, we'd never been able to fund it without Netflix. And everything started to line up. Unfortunately, the whole thing with Ukraine in 2014, that was 8 years after we first did it. But that wasn't a main impetus at the time. I mean, last year, obviously it is. But so everything, it's really serendipitous. Everything just lined up at the right time. And Edward's enthusiasm for his vision,
his vision,
just lined up.
And then when you see it finally, I mean, put together, I mean, what's that experience like?
Oh, I cried. It was incredible. The first time I saw a cut, I was with my husband and my family, and I don't think I moved. I was like a stick the whole time. Just to see your words up there and to see this vision come to life that is beyond anything you could have imagined is, this is your first film, and as a writer, this is what it was just incredible.
And when we first saw it on the big screen, which was TIFF, its world premiere, we didn't see a big screen till then, and the first thing I thought was, shit, that's loud. When the machine gun right at the beginning, it's like 5 shots, you go, whoa, turn it down.
And that score by Wolfgang Tillmans, I mean...
by Volker.
Well,
He's... What was amazing about that was to listen to their journey to come to that. And one of the lines that Ed said was to Volker was, "I want you to destroy the image with the music." And I thought, gosh, what a perfect sentence. Because really he never wanted the audience to feel comfortable, which you don't. It's continually pulling you out, and that's the purpose of it. He wants you to feel like those soldiers.
And those 3 notes that they called the Led Zeppelin notes.
Yeah. It sounds like what a torturer would use to try and keep you awake.
Yep,
Yeah.
pretty much.
No.
The fact that this comes at a time when war seems to be, I mean, not just present, but like longer and lasting longer in places in the world than normal. What do you think this movie is adding to the conversation people are having around the world now about war?
It's anti-war film. 100 years later, we're still fighting out of trenches in East Ukraine. What does that tell you? It's sort of, it tells you that this sort of film, anti-war film, with its sentiments, can never be abandoned. It always has to be brought back to the public consciousness, because, as you say, look at the world right now. 30 different wars, probably you could count, aside from the Ukraine.
I think it's raising a discourse as well, which is really nice, and especially among the younger audience. I've had a lot of friends say their children are telling me to watch this film, which to us means a lot, because what this film is about is the other side and understanding the implications of war from all sides, not just one. So it's very unusual, and what it tells us is our audiences want content that means something, and you can get everything. An intensely immersive action piece that hits all 4 quadrants, but at the same time has a very powerful message and means something.
Well, we'd like to know if anybody has any questions out here.
I do. Excuse me. My name is Tim Wilbanks, and I love history and Scottish as well. But it's very interesting, the buildup around Europe when Archduke Ferdinand was shot in 1914 in Serbia, which was another war.
Yep.
But it's very interesting over the periods of time how the chess pieces, the moving borders, each group of leaders, you have what I want.
Right.
And it's a very, very interesting aspect of the chess pieces moved in around Austria, Hungary, Poland. My great-grandmother came out of Vienna, and they escaped just before 1900 and came here. And hearing stories from her. It's very, very sad to see that we continue to repeat this of I want this, you want this. But at the same time is that it's very impressive to see that brought to light, to see what it is in the trench warfare.
He was talking about the
Yeah.
build up to World War One and the chess pieces that fell into place in that at that time that made this happen, and he was complimenting them on seeing the trench warfare described as such.
Yeah, and I think seeing the everyman, right? Seeing just the regular soldier in the trenches and the humanity of that.
Right here.
So you obviously did a lot of research, and in any film you can only represent a fraction of the things that you discovered. What were some of the most interesting things you uncovered that you couldn't find a place for in the film?
What were some of the most interesting things you couldn't find a place for in the film? The research you did.
Well, one of the directions we almost went in was, I know you're going to say this, jump in quick, was going back to the home front and how the women were dealing with it. And we went there and we actually did quite a bit of writing on that, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had like riot. There was
And
a lot of
then-
riots that went on in Germany and strikes.
And we followed
hunger
their
issues.
mothers and the girlfriends, and then we realized that's a great film, but it's not this film. And so we got, and we
Yeah.
went back to the original one.
I think as well, reading a lot of the Trench Diaries. I mean, so poignant and so beautiful and poetic, and it really takes you there. And there's obviously a scene, the latrine scene where he's reading out the letter, but there's a lot of that, and you just so much you want to put in of all of these stories that have never been told and will never be told.
Yes, I'm interested to know how this film is received in Germany. Is it only shown on Netflix or is it shown in theaters? And you mentioned how Germans are embarrassed about their history of war. So how is this film received?
I
The
think it's
reception of the film in Germany and how it's being shown, and
I think it's a mixed response to it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a touchy subject in Germany. You know, it's always going to be up to be shot down when it's a national novel. But furthermore, it addresses quite challenging issues, especially with the finishing of the film with the German general. And by the way, a lot of generals on all sides did what this German general did. So yeah, it's been a little bit mixed, but we kind of anticipated that, to be honest.
Do either of you speak German?
Oh, 9.
Yeah, a very small amount, which, yeah, it was in English. And
Yeah.
of course, like, 16 years ago, right, you could not have done this as a German-speaking language film. You wouldn't have raised the finance. So our belief was to write it in English and have it as German accents, and then that landscape changed. As Parasite won for Best Foreign Film, as well as Best Picture. 1917 came along. Netflix, as Ian said, content changed. So, and to be honest, because Ed did a pass on the script, Annie was the director, it was quite a seamless transition.
Yeah, and I think that was what I was about to say was we had complete faith with Ed that, his translation was going to be what he thought needed to be in there. You've got Les and I are both producers as well and screenwriters, so we can compartmentalize both things. We don't write together anymore, but we were absolutely happy that what we were looking for was a director who would take charge of the story, of the vision. And from a producer's perspective, that's like nirvana. Somebody to take charge and absolutely got great ideas, great vision, and you just stand back and you're like, go.
anybody in the back? Over here.
So my favorite scene in the entire film is when the tanks come in. That's so powerful, and that's obviously really important in like the development of the war, like new technology. So knowing that, how did you approach writing that? Like, how did you come to that like beautiful entrance and kind of that whole scene of how it all came together?
It's about the
Well,
tanks.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
No.
I was just going to jump out. Yeah, it was about the tanks. We wanted it to seem like an alien life form because of course they had never seen anything like that. Put yourself in their shoes. It's not like you've got social media or papers or anything like that. It would have been so they were filled with distraught at hearing and seeing these alien-like things, and I feel like, gosh, did they capture that? And we've had so many people say to us, you see every special effect in the book, all these big massive movies with ships and this and that was scarier than anything that they've ever seen. And then I think it was Ian's idea to have it go over the trench and squash the guy, like.
That sounds pretty
Sorry,
bad. My idea to squash people. Yeah, that guy. Yeah. But it's true.
It's and is literally the machinery of war being one of the themes of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I think the other day, I'm not going to drop the name, but I said to somebody, it's the industrialization of death. You know, that's what it came across.
I mean, I want to get into one question though about the armistice stuff, which is also really important that you added, because that Erzberger is a real figure.
yes, yeah, absolutely, real figure in history, who ended up getting assassinated, and everything pinned on him in the end. And again, that historical context was just so critical for us to understand the implications of what happens when you do crush your enemies. Now, that's not to say Germany didn't have a massive role and a bad role at that, but, you know, what happens if was the question that we wanted to pose, and we know what happens if. Yeah, so a fascinating character, and that's one of the biggest things as a writer and a filmmaker that we both love is research, because that's where a lot of your wonderful ideas come from.
And we wanted to include sort of that realism, actual people, without going into a documentary, of course. But you know, and that was an important part to actually include an actual person that 2 years after the war he was assassinated by the right, you know, in Germany.
Power of the anti-war statement is the intensity of this film, but I wonder, in a world where it's all about commercialization and appeal, did you have any pushback for the intensity, the violence, the true impact? It's very hard to watch at times. Was there pushback from Netflix or any other entity?
Was there pushback about the intensity of the war stuff in this movie? And
Not at all, to be honest, because I think it's done in such a way that you're with the character, you're with Paul. It's not fetishized at all. And in fact, a lot of the time, it's the reaction of the characters that you're seeing, rather than the out and out, you know, let's just do it for the sake of it. Everything felt like it had meaning, and that was a really important aspect of the action that Ian and I always came back to, was every piece of action has to have some kind of character, narrative, arc, or importance to it. Otherwise, don't put it in.
Wonderful, you got to be able to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Because of so much research and because of Netflix and because of the long development time, was there ever any, I guess, suggestion from Netflix or temptation on your part to expand this into a series and not make a feature film?
was there any temptation on Netflix's part toward you to expand this, make it longer than just one movie?
Yeah, in fact, we went down that road a little bit before Ed came along, and that was really just an artifact of you're constantly having to jump around and figure out the best way to get something off the ground. And we had that kind of opportunity. You know, if you can't get it off the ground as a feature, that's the next thing, you know.
It's the worst case scenario.
Yeah, but for this, it's just, it is such an intense experience that it really has to be a feature. If you drew it out, I think you would lose that immediacy.
Well, you could make a feature now about the women that you were talking about. That would be.
I think so.
Hi, I'm a very big fan of the book. I read it in school, and you said that you read it like a lot, which makes sense. But I was just wondering if there was a scene in the book that you really wanted to put in the movie, but just had to scrap it.
The Himmelsdorf stuff, probably.
A scene you
would
had,
be-
a scene you had to scrap from the book.
Yeah, so so there's a character called Himmelsdorf, who is kind of one of the teachers that ends up
like a drill
training
sergeant.
a drill sergeant. And I love the arc of his character, but again, it's so hard when you're adapting and you have to take stuff out, but you just do.
It was, I mean, it was 2.5 hours. I mean, imagine how long it would be if we started to put all that stuff in. You know, you just have to be selective. You have to get tunnel vision. What complements the actual through line, the story through line, and you have to be really, you know, strong and just take stuff out that you often really like, but it
And I
just
think,
doesn't fit.
yeah, I think if it's about too many things, it's about nothing. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned thus far.
I know I talked to Edward Berger, and he talked about what it was like to shoot the scene in the
Trench.
in
I
the-
mean,
in the-
shell hole.
in the crater, and that he wanted to take as long as it took to get every single aspect of every beat of that scene right.
That
Well,
is
that
my-
was, of
that is
course,
my-
from the book.
Yeah, that
it's
that
a
that scene
famous
is from the
Duval
book.
scene. Yeah.
That is my most favorite scene in the movie, I think, because for me it represents a real sort of risk on Ed's part, because he really extends the scene, and I felt like he was really brave as a filmmaker to do what he did with that edit. Obviously, the acting is incredible, but he makes you you're so desperate to get out of that scene, but you want to be in it, and I don't think I've ever experienced that in a film.
And I think one of the things about the film and the making of it is everybody had to commit 100% to the vision. You know, I mean, the fact is, not Felix Camara, the lead. I mean, brilliant actor. It's one of the things, you know. He made us look really good as writers, you know, because he was such a great actor. And that's the scene in Duval that Les is talking about. You know, it's so powerful.
But what was cool, what's really interesting about that scene is, of course, none of the makeup artists, none of the supporting crew could be down in the shell hole. They all had to be up above. And so many of them, in fact, were kind of crying watching it. And at one point, Felix, our actor, there was this little noise he kept on hearing, and it was the cameraman. He kept on crying every take because it was so impactful. But they couldn't actually get down into the crater. They couldn't go down very often, so the makeup artist had to really stick that mud on. Because anytime they went down to the crater, of course, they'd have to take away their footsteps. So just the challenge of making this film was so intense.
We have time for one more, so is there
Yeah.
truth to the story that her skills as a triathlete helped fund the film?
Specifically, the winnings.
That's right. Yeah. So, well, you know, I'm a 5-time world champion in triathlon, so I've been able to sort of earn some money along the way. So I really am crazy, just so you know, and he can attest to that. But every year, of course, trying to raise the money. Prize money is race winnings. You're never guaranteed that, right? So that was like our little icing on the cake that would kind of pay for the option. And one specific year, we didn't have any money for the option, and so I went out to Costa Rica to do a race, knowing that I had a good chance of winning it because of who was there, and I was really fit that year. And I was like, great, awesome, perfect. So the day before the race, I pre-ride a course because all of the triathlons I do are off-road on mountain bikes, on trails, trail running. So just like in Formula One, you go around the race course. So I went around the race course, I fell off, and I actually broke my shoulder. So it was a total travesty, lots of tears, and I couldn't lift my arm at all. And I spoke to my husband, who's now my writing partner, but he's a sports psychologist. And he said, okay, let's break this down. He said, do you think you can bike? And I went out and I tested it. I could kind of prop my hand up. And I thought, well, I'll just walk down the descents. And okay, I'll lose some time, but at least I'm giving it a go. Can I run? Well, I could run, a bit of painkillers. It wasn't too bad. Went down to the water, not a fucking chance. I could not lift my arm up at all. And my husband looks at me and he says, you know, you're really good at the one-arm drill. Why don't you try swimming with one arm? So anyway, the swim was a mile long in the open ocean, and I gave it a bash, and I got through the swim. Funnily enough, he was standing on the shore, and a lot of people were saying, who is that girl that's miles behind? They just give pro cards out to anyone these days. So I came out the water 12 minutes down off the lead, and then totally exhausted, of course, and then I rowed up to second. Had to get off a good few times and push my bike, and then ran into first for the win. So I got so I got the prize money. We maintained the option, and here we are. So
Wow, Ian, can you top that at all? Or, I don't know.
Funny you should say that. No,
really good at drinking tequila.
that's right.
Well,
Sponsorship, anybody.
What a wonderfully inspiring story to end this on, and congratulations to both of you for seeing this through, basically, and making such a great job of it. So thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching.